This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. The number one factor which determines who one becomes as an adult is, and it's not really a shocker, drumroll, how one was raised. Good parenting has always and will always be of pinnacle importance when talking about the future of humanity. Parenting styles are behaviors that parents use to discipline and raise their children. They are so crucial because they affect everything, from the way a child sees themselves and their interactions to other people, affecting not only later adolescence but all the way into adulthood. Ideally, these styles support healthy growth and development because they will greatly influence a child's behavior and personality for the rest of their life. Whether you had one parent or multiple parent-like figures, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, or adopted, it can be a mixed bag for many. Let's say your mother isn't exclusively the woman whose ovaries you grew up inside and then who birthed you, but instead more the woman who raised you, which is usually but not necessarily always the same person. Same with your father. It's not just the sack you were once swimming around inside during your tadpole form, but the man who raised you. We have a buddy who, in junior high school, his parents separated and eventually each remarried. Then in high school found out he was the product of a sperm donor. So technically he has three dads, a donor dad, a stepdad, and a dad who raised him, and he actually considers the dad who raised him his primary dad. So however the chessboard of your adolescence was structured, you certainly had older feminine and masculine influences. There are multiple parenting styles, such as authoritative, uninvolved, permissive, or authoritarian. Most little people growing up are raised in a somewhat mix of these. Ideally, they would be by far raised in a mostly an authoritative style, which is based on the largest amount of love and time commitment, in which parents are teachers that provide a living environment while also helping their little person or people face and overcome challenges, enforcing rules and consequences while considering their child's feelings, explaining the reasons behind the rules they establish, and putting a lot of effort into creating and maintaining a positive parent-child relationship. This is also characterized by an openness to new experiences and by creativity and experimentation. Then there is an uninvolved style, consisting of being absent, which can happen because a parent is crap and just doesn't care, but more likely does involve loving parents, or more likely a single parent who is just having to work their ass off and just isn't around that much. They are thus not as directly involved or knowledgeable about their child's life. Then you've got a permissive parenting style, which can come from a loving parent but to a lukewarm degree and is frankly overly lazy, resulting in an overly lax attitude, with a more or less do whatever the child wants with minimal parental interference, in which rules are loosely set but not really reinforced. We know a single parent whose child is an absolute pain and a drain, which we can barely stand. They basically let their offspring continue its established patterns of being very reactionary, crass, and selfish without trying to adjust these negative traits. So we suspect this child is already on their way to being rubbish into their adulthood. Finally, we have the worst parenting style, and this is why this is round 4 in our pro-democracy political philosophy series, which is an authoritarian parenting style that causes the most pain and societal damage. Most of the time, authoritarian parents take little to no consideration for their child's feelings. When it comes to discipline and rules, they believe that there are no other rules but theirs. Most of the time, the child's sentiments and good behaviors are not seen or heard. This crap style focuses on obedience with little to no interest in negotiation and punishment over discipline, often teaching children that they are the problem, to feel sorry for their inevitable mistakes, while the parents themselves are said to be somewhat infallible, instead of highlighting what both the parent and child do correctly, along with what they can each improve. There is little to no gray area, instead only starkness of black and white, wrong and right, all from the authoritarian parent's point of view. Within families, there is usually a blending of these styles, while there's often a mix of these blended styles from multiple other influences, parental or societal, gotten either directly in the household or via tribe or community, or lack of community. Regardless of being scientifically based or religiously based, or a mix of the two, these styles can still stand. However, the first 3 allow for more capacity for self-criticism, recognition and complexity, and variation in the expression of beliefs. And the last one is unquestioned and unreflective, and thereby where intolerance, prejudice, and dogma typically thrive. Within the family or tribe, regardless of cultural configuration, there is inevitably a hierarchy, meaning a system in which people or things are put at various levels or ranks according to their power and importance. Led by the head of the household, either the matriarch or patriarch, or if most balanced, both. And the hierarchy of influence comes down from there. If one has a grandmother, mother, aunts, and sisters, this is primarily the feminine side of the family. If grandma has become very elderly, the leadership role and matriarch is the mother. If one has a grandfather, father, uncles, and brothers, this is the primarily masculine side of the family. If grandpa has become very elderly, the leadership role is the patriarch or father. This is standard operating procedure within humans and other mammals like elephants, as a mother elephant will be the one who makes the decisions on behalf of the elephant tribe in regards to where they search in the height of summer for the watering holes, a crucial leadership decision which can literally mean life or death for the tribe. We have spoken elsewhere on hierarchy and how it does very much exist within nature. A small portion of any group are the tallest and smartest and, yes, a bit more creative and talented than the rest. Yet one's development and attitude toward both hierarchy and authority is a crucial factor for how someone ends up being either more pro-democratic versus more pro-authoritarian into their adulthood. Referencing our previous essay at this point, Gender and Sexuality Balance, we are going to focus specifically on the patriarchal dynamics within how one was raised within the family, specifically relating to being off-balanced with the masculine hierarchy. For it's one thing to teach a little person to respect others, especially their elders of both sexes. In more authoritarian parenting styles, it's the father who is the one in charge at the top of the hierarchy and gets the most respect, because they are the unquestioned authority and instill fear, and often transfers down a very tough love at best, or chauvinist, or even mentally or physically abusive behavior at worst from grandfather to sons within the authoritarian parenting style. This is the power and control over the family dynamic, giving power dad downloads from father to son. In authoritative parenting styles, there is usually not only a respect for elders taught, with some respect for hierarchy, but a more balanced dynamic being taught which also allows for questioning the hierarchy and even being very skeptical to aspects of authority. This is a more balanced, open-minded, and growth-based mindset which allows for looking more deeply at life. Because as one gets older, when they look past the facades and peel back the curtains of power, the authorities oftentimes not only look unimpressive, but morally bankrupt. But in the authoritarian household, they are about indoctrination and unquestionable subservience into the higher masculine authority, with a playbook to continually naturalize power and existing entrenched forms of authority, with authority being defined as legal power or the right to command or to act, as the authority of a prince over subjects and parents over children, power, rule, sway, which in their minds is to be revered, and certainly never questioned. Now, if one gets indoctrinated in the first 7 years, or first 14 years, or the first 21 years of their life into authoritarian parenting, it's likely that fathering style is not only hard installed, but mostly or completely loveless. Loving people produce other loving people. But hurt people also have a higher ratio of producing other hurt people. If one is primarily loving, there is a good chance their child will be primarily loving. If they lack love to others in their family, there is a strong chance their children will both lack love to both others in society and their eventual children. Either the masculine or feminine side can be more the problem. But typically, if one parent is really loving and the other is very cold, tough love, or straight up physically or verbally abusive, there is certainly a chance the children can turn out okay. But it's certainly less likely than if both parents are loving and nurturing. If both parents lack love, it's almost guaranteed their offspring will be the same because physically and mentally abusive parents produce physically and mentally abusive children the majority of the time. Ask any school teacher, counselor, superintendent, or principal, and they will tell you that when a kid is a bully at school, it's almost certain that one of the parents at home is a bully. This very sadly and unfortunately cascades down through the generations. If one has one parent who's authoritative and the other one who's more authoritarian, it's likely their little people can still turn out to be okay and authoritative into adulthood and their own parenting. But if both parents are authoritarian, it's much more likely that the child will grow up to be an authoritarian. On rare occasions where someone does grow up with multiple authoritarian parents and still turns out to be mostly authoritative in their parenting, we should all have infinite respect for those whose influences were all loveless but turned out loving to others and didn't continue the cycle of pain down to their children, which can only happen, frankly, through a great deal of personal self-development. The feminine side is typically more nurturing, which is a built-in operating system dynamic that is designed for raising children. And that has to be heavily reduced or removed in authoritarian parenting, because it's more heart, and they must make one heartless, usually under the guise of being strong, a fighter, a man's man, or a super ultra alpha. So you guessed correctly where this is going. A main determinant of democratic versus authoritarian leanings is due to your relationship or lack thereof with your father. If you didn't have a father, or a shit father, or a mentally or physically abusive father, or no father with a mentally or physically abusive masculinized mother, not only is one more prone to violence externally, but internally are much more prone to looking to Sky Daddy as your father, specifically within the Christian menus Sky Daddy and Sky Daddy's son. We can always tell this is the case for someone who puts God or Jesus or Allah very front and center in their speech. They are speaking about their father figure they never had and always wish they had from their youth. For they claim one can only have love through God, no other way. Ask any secular, well-educated person who grew up with loving parents what they think of these types of comments, and it's usually answered with eye rolls. Now we are about to make a major declaration here, and say that we have honestly, hand on heart, a support for the real core of religion, what we call the esoteric core. We've said this before numerous times in our work, and we'll say it again now, and we'll always stand by this. For we are not blanketly hostile to all religion, or irreligious, or what crazy extreme religious people would call a heathen who needs to repent. Remember, Sturgeon's Law, which we have also spoken over many times, says that 90% of everything is crap. However, 90% of nature and its creations are not crap, so we would modify that a bit to say that 90% of everything within modern society and culture is crap, because the primary goal of the majority of modern society and culture is just about making money. 90% of beekeeping is crap because it's commercialized. 90% of fishing is crap because it's commercial fishing. 90% of music is crap because it's commercial music. And 90% of religion is crap because it's commercial religion. Which is not from the spiritual, it is a man-made attempt of trying to create menus for the spiritual. So time and time again, we will continue to always give religion credit for the 10% it does well. The esoteric core, which one can think of as the small two circles in the center of the dartboard. In a future essay in this series, we will give an itemized whole list of each factor that separates what we call the esoteric and the spiritual core of religion, and the crap garbage that makes up the religions of empire, which thrive in authoritarianism, but one of which is an underlying dynamic in how the religion chooses to raise its children, which then extends into children being loving and thus loving adults, or hateful and thus hateful adults. And this dynamic is how they answer the age-old question, are people, human beings, the human race, fundamentally good or fundamentally bad? If one looks into how Western religious denominations such as the Amish, Anglican, Baptist, Calvary Chapel, Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran, Mennonite, Methodist, Messianic, New Apostle, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, Reformed, Salvation, Seventh-day Adventists, etc., aim to answer this question, it is that the human species is in depravity, corrupt, sinful, and primarily bad or evil, unless one does what is called repentance, which in theology can be said to be confessing to the pain, regret, or affliction which a person feels on the account of past conduct. Always trying to improve past bad behavior is good. But the problem here, and why things derail at this point into fake commercialized religion, is due to a misinterpreted concept called original sin. This Judeo-Christian concept of original sin, also described sometimes as ancestral sin, which is a view of the nature of sin in which humanity has existed since the fall of man, which is said to have arisen from Adam and Eve's transgression in Eden, the supposed sin of disobedience in eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Originally, sin can be said to be explained as that sin and its effects that we all possess in God's, or the flying spaghetti monster's, meatball eyes as a direct result of Adam's sin in the Garden of Eden. So what is meant by sin here? What should be meant, and what the Genesis story is saying, is something the esoteric core of spirituality can properly decode, which is an alchemical metaphor about how humanity is not at its highest state. It indeed had a fall, otherwise known alchemically as a separation putrefaction, in which it's lost its real initiatory lineage. That doesn't mean everyone is bad, quite the opposite is true. It just means all of humanity has gone from singular unity down into the binary material to learn from the polarity of binary mechanics. The vast majority of despiritualized theocrats have lost their real initiatory lineage and thereby don't know how to decode the good parts of their own religious text. So what they offer instead is a commercial solution. For what exoteric outer religion does with original sin has been the marketing job of all marketing jobs, which is that everyone is sinful or bad from birth, and that the only way to become not that way is to buy what they are selling. So what the fake aspects of commercial religion do with the concept of sin is interpreted as humans are sinful, meaning bad, and unless they do things subservient to the religious system's top of the hierarchy, the authority, such as repent and serve Sky Daddy, which is then said to be the only path to provide that past missing love. And your supposed free will option he has given you is a false binary to either love him or burn in hell, worship him or be tortured forever, which is not a loving dynamic but a hateful and thus fearful one, in which you risk banishment to an outgroup. By being in this culty system of authority, including, surprise, surprise, the requirement to often give it money and be subservient to it, only then can you find love from Sky Daddy and Sky Daddy's son, both of whom are said to be your only path to love. This type of agreement is very appealing to those who grew up in authoritarian households, because it supposedly provides missing love while not violating the authoritarian contract of being subservient to authority. Now, this could also lead to a much deeper and philosophical conversation about both ethics and morality, which we may touch on at a later time in this series. As morality can be said to be an intrinsic quality of things as neither beauty or any other quality that is relative to the subject in relationship to the object. If one watches a video on one of the more scuzzy corners of the internet of one person bashing another person's skull in, murdering them violently, you could say the person doing the bashing is bad. But then one could watch a nature video of an alligator ripping the side of a zebra's torso open, spilling its guts out, which is just as violent. Does that mean the alligator is bad? The Native Americans very much understood this concept, as being part of the food chain in nature at times does involve violent actions, and even the occurrence of injury or loss. Yet when they would hunt and kill an animal, they wouldn't hate or fear the animal, but instead love it and appreciate the animal during the process, and during its death, thank it and honor the spirit of it which would live on. If one traveled all over the world and spoke to most people on the planet, they would see a similar dynamic in full spectrum of incredible, to beautiful, to horrendous and awful. But in the realm of Earth, even though terrible things happen every day, produced by our species, far more good things happen every day than bad, also produced by our species. So if one talked to the majority of people, the ones of course not in cults, either in more free democratic societies or even in more authoritarian societies which have come to realize their authoritarian leaders are garbage, one would find they are all for the most part good people. The main reason why humanity is in a hot mess at this point is not because people are foundationally bad, especially in the middle or lower parts of the hierarchy, but because we are commodifying the elements of nature because of the greed of the top of the hierarchy. Saying that people are foundationally evil and bad is also a way to keep the flock, be that at their offspring or cult members, under their wing, and very fearful and thus untraveled and insular. What very theocratic people who have never owned a passport do to denigrate travel and experience with other cultures is use words like worldly. That person is worldly, which is used not as an obvious, hey, this person has gotten out and seen the world, but instead that they're someone who is only concerned with the mundane of the world and not the fake cult. The only way one can unite and not divide is by including everyone, which also brings us to a foundational dynamic of a real faith. Is it based in love, or has it been perverted to be based in hate, which is really just fear? Does it lovingly support all of the hierarchy of power and control, especially the very bottom of it, instead of supporting just the top? The real spiritual core of multi-faith religion, including real Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, will teach love and that the vast majority of humanity is foundationally good. Most religious people of faith throughout the world are sincerely devoted to a good and loving life. In fact, this is exactly the ground for which the secular and the spiritual stand together. Since we are in the West, this is where we can make the initial statement that a real Pastafarian Judeo-Christian is one who follows the teachings of Christ and actually loves thy neighbor, regardless of where the neighbor is in the socioeconomic hierarchy, over hating one who is not in their cult. One of the spiritual reasons to back this up is that the divine is pure love. It is not pure hate. and love is really the name of the game. Real spirituality, and then one aspect of it, a man-made aspect, which are the formal and official menu subscription systems of a religion, should unite and not divide. If they are uniting, they are doing their job of moving each individual closer to the divine. If they are dividing and conquering to protect entrenched authority, that is imperial dark sorcery. So a simplified way to look at good and bad can instead be always asking, what is spreading love and thus unity, and what is spreading hate and thus division? So if one comes from an authoritarian household which also advocates an extreme authoritarian-based religious dogma, supporting the concept of original sin and that humans are bad, and this also applies to communism, by the way, which just becomes authoritarian state religion, you've got a toxic combination in terms of politics. If you are forward-thinking in your politics and have always been baffled why certain other people think so opposite from you on virtually every single political policy, this is why. Because you know people are foundationally good, and the other side of the spectrum who boggles your mind have been indoctrinated into thinking they are foundationally bad. And at that point on, you will disagree on virtually every single political policy. This is why Niles has constantly been highlighting and will continue to highlight the negative aspect of what we are going to continue to call commercial fake religion in this unapologetically pro-democracy political philosophy series. If you see value in and have some care for all of your fellow patriotic countrymen or neighboring countrymen, and even all humans throughout Earth, you want them to have healthcare as a right and not a privilege, and you value governmental systems of social uplift. However, the authoritarian thinks nobody is good, thereby thinks no one should have any right towards anything without proving their goodness by rising up the socioeconomic hierarchy to becoming rich and powerful, or being part of the in-group which props up that power, which is really a cult, which are actually nested cults, their faith cult, their party cult, and their fake patriotic cult that we'll get into later. And all they think the shared political contract of government is useful for is ultimately backing not mutual relations of love and assistance, but violence. Hence their most value is put into patriarchal military might, which uses blood spilling to achieve its goals. Because that's from the alpha, macho male side of the parental hierarchy. They don't value those mother-nurturing programs of social uplift at all. They only value force and violence of their authoritarian father, with propensity to victim blame, aggression, hate, and violence. This is why the Afghan Taliban drive around with their flags and Kalashnikovs out in truck trains, and why the American Taliban drive around with their flags and AR-15s out in truck trains, because they are foundationally based in fake religious cults, only supporting their own cult members. Because in their tiny rotten brains, everyone else who is not like them is considered bad, and are then more pro-authoritarian in their political policies. Jeff Scarlett has written 2 books called The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy, books which the docuseries The Family is based after. It focuses on an organization that pretends to have something to do with spirituality, but is really led by dark imperial agents called the Fellowship, the Family, or the International Foundation. We will also get into the dark tentacles influencing the halls of power later in this pro-democracy series, but this organization is one of them. Amongst other things, it hosts an event in the United States called the National Prayer Breakfast, an annual event attended at least once by every sitting president dating back to Dwight D. Eisenhower, which is sponsored by the Fellowship, and brings thousands of leaders and influencers from around the world to Washington, D.C. every February. This group's known participants include ranking United States government officials, corporate executives, heads of religious and supposed humanitarian aid organizations, and ambassadors and high-ranking politicians from across the world. If you read the books or watch the series, you'll be able to see the pattern which we've been decoding here, which is not the reality that each human is a direct conduit to the divine, but instead the opposite dark sorcery view that the divine only speaks through people of influence and power, the authorities, who are always attempting to influence policy through back channels. Raising children to want to be self-educated, instill critical thinking, as well as sympathy and kindness and respect for others of all ages in secular households along with non-culty, real spirituality including indigenous, pagan, multi-faith practices, as well as the formal religious menus, should all love thy neighbor. Are you an educated, including sexually educated, mind you, and not repressed, secular or faith-based person who questions authority and spreads love for both sexes because you know they're both foundationally good? Then you are pro-democratic. But if you grew up with no love, lack of love, or extreme tough love, and were indoctrinated into being subservient to authority, and then strive to become the authority with power over others, regardless of education level or travel level, there is a near guarantee you will be regressive in your politics and a pro-authoritarian cold bastard who looks to scumbag strongmen as your leaders. Whether that person is living alone in a cabin in the woods with zero standing in a hierarchy, or a board member and or CEO of a mega corporation, or a dictator at the top of a hierarchy, we promise you they got that way growing up with lack of love, being forced to fear and not question patriarchal authority, and also with one other major factor that we will dive into in the next essay, which is due to the mass psychology of sexual repression.